also be studying and be open to the idea of removing the face mask requirement in schools. Citing a study conducted by CNN medical analyst Dr. Lena Wen, Octa fellow Father Nick Austriaco says that the wearing of face masks has affected the social development of children. This supposedly is evident in their language development, social interaction, and extracurricular activities.
Our children have suffered for 2 years. They did not be nearly one of the longest in the whole world of a lockdown without school. We must move from mask to real face-to-face for our children. And since the data shows that masking is not as effective, we should be willing to move there as soon as possible.
However, the health department maintains that the wearing of face masks is still important to children, especially now that they are back in classrooms. Based on data, only about 43% of children from ages 5 to 11 are fully vaccinated.
Masking is protecting our children. Pag tinignan po natin ang atin pong mga kabataan, sila po ay pumapasok na ngayon sa eskwelahan. So there is more interaction, there is more mobility.
Here to give us her take on the possible easing of the mask mandate in schools, we have with us pediatric infectious disease expert Dr. Ong-Lim. Good evening. Welcome to The Big Story, Dr. Ong-Lim.
Good evening, Robby.
Ma'am, your take on this discussion?
Evidence has actually shown that masks are protective when we talk about transmission within enclosed spaces and in areas where physical distancing cannot be implemented. In countries that have continued to hold face-to-face classes, even during the peak of the pandemic, there has been data showing us that schools that have continued to implement masking guidelines and mandates have shown lower numbers of cases of in-school transmission. So for the meantime, where we have so many changes going on in a setting where cases are still yet to plateau, and we have still quite some way to go with respect to vaccination. I think we don't lose anything by maintaining the masks for our kids, particularly when they go back to school.
Yes, the concern for infections and also the benefits and the efficacy of masks, that clearly has been established. But is it a valid concern at the very least when this research takes a look at it, not necessarily purely from the perspective of infection, but from the perspective as well of child development?
Well, of course, we know that a lot of our communication takes its cues from nonverbal language, facial expression, even looking at the way we express our words. But again, as in many of the interventions that we implemented to try to control the pandemic, it's a question of balancing the risks and benefits. So siguro dahil nabanggit nga kanina dun sa simula ng programa, na ang tagal na nga na hindi pa natin pinapasok ang mga bata sa eskwelahan. Ngayon pa lang tayo babalik sa face-to-face classes. Implementing all of these variables all at the same time will really make it very difficult for us to assess where to intervene should there be clustering of cases. So siguro, from the pediatric infectious disease perspective, I don't think we lose anything by being cautious, especially since we are just implementing the return to classes.
Right. Dr. Ong-Lim, we have just gotten back to face-to-face classes. For some kids, it's 3 months. For some, almost a month. Do you have any data from on the ground on how many infections or if are there transmissions in schools? Are there numbers kahit from a few case studies lang or certain regions or certain localities?
Well, right now, we don't really have anything solid coming from the schools. But I can cite, as I mentioned earlier, data coming from other settings which have continued face-to-face classes, and in the context of continuing community transmission. If you're following the news from abroad, they're actually again looking at re-implementing masking in school settings. So medyo kung sila tinitignan nila yung pagbabalik ng mask, tapos tayo naman nag-iisip tayong magtanggal, hindi nga ba magkasalungat yun? Nakita na nga nila, nanggaling na sila doon, di ba, sa setting na wala silang mask, and yet they're thinking about requiring masks in schools, especially if there's a high level of community transmission.
What about vaccinations, Doc? Vaccinations in school, this has been brought up a number of times before the opening of classes this year. Is there any chance na magpapatuloy ito or that we'll see it happening, at least having vax sites in schools?
I did hear from the Department of Education team that they're looking at this, in conjunction with the Department of Health. And this can be very much aligned with the settings-based program that the DOH is now pushing as part of the booster campaign. So sana magkaroon nga ng opportunity to have that in place, because we also know that some people have difficulty accessing their primary and booster series, and locating these vaccination sites in schools will certainly be very convenient.
Right, maraming salamat. Thank you for joining us tonight and sharing your time with us. Pediatric infectious diseases expert Dr. Anna Ong-Lim. Thank you, Doc. Join us in the conversation. Our big question tonight: should the mask mandate also be relaxed in schools? Share your thoughts on our Facebook and YouTube live stream, or post a tweet with the hashtag #TheBigStory. We'll show some of your comments later on in the program.
And after the break, we will discuss the push for the retention of the 70-30 hybrid work arrangement with Employers Confederation of the Philippines President Sergio Ortiz-Luis Jr. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News.
Joint Typhoon Warning Center projects the storm will hit China's east coast on Wednesday. Last week, Super Typhoon Hinnamnor brushed past the shipping hub, temporarily closing the major container port of Yongshan. Lawyers for Donald Trump are fighting a U.S. Justice Department request to continue using documents with classified markings seized from his Mar-a-Lago estate as part of an investigation into potential mishandling of government records. A judge previously granted Trump's request for an outside special master to review the documents. The judge also temporarily barred federal investigators from using the seized material. King Charles III has vowed to uphold Britain's parliamentary democracy, making a clear indication that he would stay out of politics during his reign. Speaking at Westminster Hall,
course, everything that you can buy. But there's one big difference this year. Fans are paying a lot more than what they normally would in years past. And you guessed it, inflation. It's hitting the US Open just like it is everywhere else in the country right now. You can expect to see food and drink costs up at least 10% from years past. And that signature honeydew included $22 this year. You still get to keep the branded cup. And it's not just food and souvenirs. Ticket prices are also up a lot this year.
You're watching The Big Story here on One News. Now that Malacanang has relaxed the mask mandate nationwide, how is the public responding to this new policy? Mobile journalist King Senko tells us in this report.
In the bustling streets of Divisoria, one cannot help but notice that most people are still wearing their face mask. Despite President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. relaxing the face mask policy outdoors, some say they are not ready to leave their homes without any sort of protection against the COVID-19 virus.
Sa akin po kasi, based lang sa opinion ko, disagree ako kasi simulang nagkaroon ng pandemic. Ito kasing face mask, kasama na siya sa personal hygiene ng isang tao. Sa akin lang naman, opinion ko lang. So ayun, kasi hindi lang naman COVID yung virus na na-expose natin sa public place eh.
Others have chosen to keep their masks handy so that they are prepared to enter indoor establishments and ride any mode of public transportation. For Dr. Edsel Salvania, it is about time for the government to relax its face mask policy. But the question is, when will the public be allowed to enter indoor areas without face masks?
Naman natin na that's removing one more layer of protection every time we remove these things. So ang time frame dyan is actually, ang sasabihin ko sa inyo, tingnan muna natin kung ano yung magiging epekto nitong pagtanggal natin sa outdoor spaces.
No matter how policies change, at the end of the day, we should never be complacent towards COVID-19. Protect yourself and your loved ones by getting vaccinated and following health protocols at all times. Mobile journalist King Senko, we are One News.
The Private Sector Advisory Council for Jobs is recommending to the President to maintain the 70-30 hybrid work setup. Council lead Joey Concepcion admits that he is in favor of allowing 100% of workers to report on-site to help the economy. But Concepcion says there are certain exceptions to those who need to work from home. Okta Research Fellow Ranjit Rai expressed his support for the proposal.
I think it's the trend. It is the reality. Of course, there are industries like those of Sir Joey, where there's lots of manufacturing and there's a need for factory workers to go to the site. Improvement in productivity. All of these are going to be affected by how industry calibrates towards this new work arrangements.
To share his thoughts on the hybrid work setup recommendation, we have with us on the line Sergio Ortiz-Luis Jr., President of the Employers Confederation of the Philippines. Good evening. Welcome to The Big Story, sir.
Good evening to you and your listeners and watchers.
Sir, first of all, as Professor Rai said, this is at the very least a trend. People are trying to find that balance. What are your thoughts on this, and where should this actually be policy, or do we leave it to the private sector to just find that balance on their own?
Well, to begin with, unlike the face shield, the face mask is not really a problem, no? Even in the place of work. It does not, so a lot of people even got used to it already. And I think the relaxation is okay with certain prohibition, like cannot be indoors, cannot be for those who have been immunocompromised, or for all people. The problem is how do you implement this? By giving an order that you allow it to certain places, for certain people, you have to be able to communicate well. And then the coordination between the LGUs, which probably will implement it differently from each other, will be difficult. Even our policemen who are going to implement it probably will end up not wearing any mask while in the streets. And people before, if you go out and you forget your mask, you go back or you try to get another mask. Now, if you go out, forget it, most probably, it's okay. A lot of people are wearing it anyway. So at the end of the day, it will be interpreted by everybody in accordance with their convenience. And most probably, even in closed spaces, if they will not be able to, IATF is not able to put up some regulations for the owners of establishment, everybody will end up not wearing masks there also. So I guess having a relaxation like that, you have to be able to communicate well and coordinate well and implement well. Otherwise, we'll end up with all sorts of problems.
All right. Well, what about, of course, face masks? One thing that we have gotten used to during the last 2 years under a pandemic. The other thing is working from home. In fact, a lot of people are not wanting to go back to the workplace and now are being encouraged to go back and fulfill a 70%, 30% work and office kind of hybrid setup, Robbie. Sir Sergio, do you agree with this balance of 70%, 30% hybrid work setup? And in your opinion, in the last, at least when people started going back to work, do you think this has at all impacted our productivity as a nation?
Well, definitely, it's common sense that working from home is different from working in your office or in your place of work, no? Of course, a lot of people will argue, well, we are able to do what we have to do, and but the reality is it depends on the employer. If the employer feels that that's an arrangement that is okay, there should be no mandatory thing about it. They have to decide on a corporate basis what they would like to do with it. Not many companies can do work from home because of manufacturing, construction. So these are basically office workers that we're talking about, so the company has to decide. It's not the decision of the employee to be able to do that, because at the end of the day, it's the company that is responsible for productivity.
All right, so discretion still rests with the employers. Thank you so much. Employees Confederation of the Philippines President Sergio Ortiz-Luis Jr. on the phone. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
And right after the break, we'll get the latest updates on England's preparations for Queen Elizabeth II's funeral. That and more when the big story returns. Keep it here on One News. All sides, all the time.
This is AP News Minute. Ukrainian officials
Happy birthday to you.
Personnel from the Interior, Environment, and the Agriculture departments surprised President Ferdinand Marcos Jr. during his 65th birthday. The president marked his first birthday as president by leading the national simultaneous bamboo and tree planting kickoff ceremony at an old sanitary landfill in San Mateo, Rizal. He planted a bamboo together with Environment Secretary Antonia Yulo Loizaga and DILG Secretary Benher Abalos.
Para yung kaarawan ko ay maging mas makabuluhan, ay sabi ko, gawa tayo ng greening, tree planting, at yan naman talaga ay ang pinaka-importanting issue hindi lamang sa Pilipinas kung hindi sa buong mundo ngayon.
In his speech, the president mentioned his plan to put up 46,000 hectares of reforestation sites this year. Meanwhile, DENR is projecting to have more than 11,000 hectares of enhanced national greening program sites by 2023.
The seedlings that we will plant today will be significant in realizing this goal. This program will generate jobs, will generate opportunities, and will generate livelihood for our countrymen. Preserving the environment is nothing less than preserving life.
Following the ceremony, the president went back to Malacanang and signed an executive order that gives a one-year moratorium on payments for the annual amortization and interest of agrarian reform beneficiaries. This was followed by a birthday luncheon in Malacanang. Present in the event are Vice President Sara Duterte, House Speaker Martin Romualdez, Senate President Mig Zubiri, now Congresswoman Gloria Arroyo, and members of his cabinet. The vice president even posted a selfie with the president wishing him good health and happiness. Marcos, meanwhile, spent his afternoon with the children of White Cross as he visits DSWD centers and residential care facilities in San Juan. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
The coffin of the late Queen Elizabeth is set to be flown to London from Edinburgh at around midnight Philippine time.
In London, thousands have already queued up to pay their last respects. To give us more updates, we have with us on the show News 5 reporter Jay Orense. He is joining us live from London. Hi, Jay. How is it over there? Can you describe it for us?
Hi, Sean and Robbie. Right now, thousands of people are still lining up at St. John's Cathedral in Edinburgh, Scotland, paying their last respect to the Queen. A steady stream of tourists and locals can still be seen outside, waiting for their turn to take a glimpse of the late monarch. It will remain at the cathedral till 12 midnight Manila time before it begins its journey back to the Buckingham Palace late tonight also. While here in London, heightened security procedures are being done as the city awaits for the arrival of Queen Elizabeth II tonight. There's also an elevated anticipation among journalists in London as they gear up for their hourly updates. While tourists and Londoners are ready to camp out around the vicinity of the palace just to witness the homecoming of their much-loved monarch.
And speaking of everything for this coming days, it's already been a hectic few days since the Queen passed away. Can you tell us the lineup of events that we expect once the Queen's coffin arrives in London?
Queen Elizabeth will lie in state in the palace until tomorrow, as giving the royal staff their time to pay their last respect for the Queen that they've served, actually. While tomorrow, a short funeral procession will be held also for the late Queen. The procession will end at Westminster Hall, where the body of the Queen Elizabeth will remain for the next 4 days. And it will be open for the public 24 hours, and they are actually expecting a long queue that might stretch for 5 miles, according to the Metro Police.
All right, I know what's on the agenda of King Charles III. What is his schedule like?
King Charles III and Queen Consort Camilla are still currently in Northern Ireland for now. They were seen inside the grounds of Hillsborough Castle, walking around, and they also greeted throngs of supporters outside the royal residence. But they are expected to be back here in London later tonight as well.
Okay, that was Jay Orense reporting to us live from London. Thanks, Jay. And that's the big story tonight. For more updates, follow News 5, The Philippine Star, and Business World Online. You may also log on to onenews.ph for more in-depth analysis. Ako po si Robbie Alampay.
The big story is also available via Signal Play. Make a free account now at signalplay.com and stream One News anytime, anywhere. I'm Sean Yao.
We are One News, all sides, all the time.